You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take.
Plan. I'm the enemy. Because I like to think.
You can dress like a Barbie doll. You can hang out like a beggar's mom. You fit in anywhere you go. Bring your own style just to steal the show. You started so well with a slow and you said, drink with a loud, you drink your smoke on your bed. Love by all yourself, you know. You're always involved, you're the star of the show.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Ready to save the world again?
After you, 006. Maybe Wade was right. There's no dish.
Come back alive.
I guess it helps if the mic's not muted. Welcome to Fulton Land Live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Glad to see you here today. We're flying solo again. Mr. Russ Leach, my trusty co-host, is feeling a bit under the weather. Nothing major, just seasonal stuff. So we're going solo this morning. I'd like to say hello to Leg Kick One, first in the chat today. Good to see you. Past Master Dan, 004, welcome. American Comics Company, good to see you. Marigo Ann, hello, good to see you. It's been a while. Adam Miller. Mr. Antoine Dennison, a.k.a. the writer, artist, and creator of the upcoming project Red Empires. Good to see you, my friend. Past Master Dan asks if this is a seasonal illness like Taco Bell. I apparently it's the common cold, despite some some of the stories we see in the media, some of which we'll discuss today. There actually is more going on in the world than COVID, and so yeah, there's still the same old rhinovirus, good old common cold, still making the rounds. I'm sure that the good old common flu and many others are still right where they've always been. So yeah, Russ and the family are feeling a bit under the weather, so he's taking the day off, and hope they feel better soon. Marigo Ann says an acquaintance shared an article about the truckers earlier. Yeah, we're going to get into a little bit. I put a little disclaimer out on Twitter. I'm not going to get into any specific politics. I certainly have opinions about what's going on with the truckers convoy in Canada. There's some other ancillary details related to that. We might or might not get into that depending on what you guys want to do. But it's the story of the truckers convoy, depending on who tells it, can vary wildly. So that means there's multiple stories out there, and we'll get into some of that. Past Master Dan asks if somebody famous died to distract us yet. Not sure. I've been a little out of the loop. I guess it's possible. If so, I have not been distracted. I've been focused on other things. Pastmaster Dan says the police are taking their firewood. What's up with that? If they don't have any firewood, they might have to start, going back to the old days of dung fires. I don't think anybody wants that. Hey, Jasper, thanks for joining us today. And Amanda B, good to see you both. So, as Anne mentioned, and as you probably saw in the thumbnail with the trucker convoy in Canada, it's obviously one of the big stories that's been going on. I guess it's been at least a couple of weeks. I've not been following it on a day-to-day basis. I'm not sure exactly when it started, and I'm not sure exactly when it gained national prominence and then international prominence. But it's one of the cultural phenomena that I've seen, I think we've all seen over the past couple of years, that really highlights the difference in how mass media uses storytelling, because you've got the different media outlets that have definite socio-political biases, and that will certainly influence the story that they tell about, let's say, the convoy, for example. And obviously many of us have seen the story presented as these are, by some, it's been presented as these are hardworking Canadian citizens who feel like their government is doing them wrong, and they feel like it's been going on for a long time, and they've decided to make their feelings known in person. And so they showed up in the Capitol and are voicing their displeasure. People with a different view on it have been saying that this is, all kinds of things, whether it's domestic terrorism or whether it's a bunch of racists on parade or what. I haven't gone too far down that rabbit hole. I've just seen a few things here and there. But clearly, there's an objective event that's been going on, and it's viewed differently by different people, and then we all come to our own conclusions. Obviously, we look at what we see, what we hear. We use that information to come up with some type of reaction. And if the storyteller, whether it's a news broadcaster, whether it's a YouTuber, whether it's our neighbor, if they know that they've got an inherent bias and they decide to work that into the story, as we see so often with news broadcasters, let's say, since we're talking about media, then it's usually done, I would think, with the intention to persuade, right? And they want to persuade us, the listener or the viewer, to some line of thinking. They want to motivate us into some type of action or inaction, right? In a sense, all storytelling is a form of manipulation, positive, negative, a bit of both. Storytellers like myself want to entertain people, so we will try to put things into stories that will, in a sense, manipulate a person into being entertained, into having a good time, into escaping whatever it is they want to escape from for a little while to enjoy that entertainment. On the other hand, I think we've all been on the receiving end of storytellers who want to manipulate us into doing something that is, they believe, to their benefit, right? And if it sounds like I'm being a little vague here, it's because we're on YouTube, and YouTube has a bad habit of censoring content and taking it off the air if you use certain no words. So I'm going to try to navigate today's topic in a way that doesn't get the show pulled. The channel's not monetized, so I have no financial interest in watching what I say. I simply like to have the conversation take place. And so, since this is a platform we're on, this is the situation we're in. So anyway, Vilned says the CBC, Canada's state broadcaster, said the Russians might be the instigators of the convoy. Oh, really? I seem to remember that in the United States, certain left-leaning mass media outlets claimed that the Russians did all kinds of things, influence elections, steal elections. I'm surprised that they haven't been blamed for COVID. Welcome, Woodrow. Glad to see you. So when it comes to the convoy, I'm curious to see in the chat, where do you guys think this is going? And what are the stories you've been hearing? Like Vilned has said that, there have been reports of police taking firewood from the protesters, taking away gas, their fuel, I guess, for their trucks, possibly for fires or for cooking, arresting people for honking. I've got a I've got a little example here of, I guess, what you might call a counter narrative, or maybe justification for those types of things that the police may be doing out there. I'm going to share the screen. And this is a clip from a YouTube channel called The Rubin Report. A guy named Dave Rubin is, I guess you would call him a political commentator. So he was a self-described lefty who in recent years has become pretty much a centrist, from what I can tell. And so this is from his show from several days ago. This came up in my YouTube recommends list. And so I was watching it, and let's hear what the Prime Minister of Canada has to say about this convoy, these protesters.
One of the things we all frustrated everyone is.
Sorry about that. Let's try that again. Whoops. Sorry, guys. This was all set up. Promise.
We all understand is just how frustrated everyone is. We're all frustrated. We're all sick and tired of restrictions, of mandates, of having to make sacrifices, of not being able to do the things we love. I can understand frustrations with mandates, but mandates are the way to avoid further restrictions or having to be restricted. As people get vaccinated, as Canadians have gotten vaccinated, we've been able to get through things. And this team is going to stay focused on doing exactly that.
So the Prime Minister there, someone asked if that's Justin Castro. I do believe his name is Justin Trudeau, although there have been some very interesting comparisons between him and Fidel Castro, the former dictator of Cuba. Pastmaster Dan says the protesters were using empty fuel cans as symbols. See, so this is one of the things that I think is interesting when it comes to storytelling is that, Trudeau has repeatedly portrayed, as he's been telling the story to the world of what's going on, he's been portraying these protesters as racist, as bigots, as homophobes, as transphobes. I mean, the guy has pulled just about every istophobe name in the book. And again, I'm not even following this that closely, and yet I see clips of this almost on a daily basis. And then he talks about how, the way out of this is mandates, and he goes into talking about vaccines. And so you can tell that he's not really engaging with an audience at that point. He's just repeating lines from a script. And so the effectiveness, in my opinion, of him as a storyteller is very poor, because it doesn't seem like he's really trying to reach the audience, quote unquote, of the Canadian people. It seems like from the beginning, my perspective only, he's been just speaking to one very select audience, which is people who he believes agree with him. Now, it seems to me as a prime minister, if you were going to be trying to reach out and interact with your constituents, you would want to be thinking about who your audience is and that they don't all just have one opinion, and that you might want to consider other perspectives and try to appeal to those people. Speaking of Russians, American Comics Company says, well, of course, because the Turkish drivers, quote unquote, sound like Russians. The identity politics doesn't come with a self-complex personality disorder at all. Vilnet says, Alberta lifted mandates midnight last night. Saskatchewan will be lifting mandates the 1st of next week. Yeah, I find it very interesting that there's been a wave of mask mandates being lifted. I don't know if the same is true of vaccine mandates. I'd appreciate it if anybody in the chat can contribute any news on that. Here in California, where I'm at, we had mask mandates lifted towards the end of last year, and then they were reinstituted December 15th, and they're supposed to be lifted again February 15th. So in 5 days, we'll find out if that's the case. I remember when at the start of all of this in March of 2020, it was stay home, for 2 weeks to flatten the curve, stay home for 2 weeks to slow the spread. And 2 weeks turned into 2 months, turned into 2 years. So I'm not taking anything for granted at this point. Chuck Reardon says that Trudeau looks like a man in a panic. It is true that he took off, apparently went into hiding. From what I've been told, what I've read, what I've heard, what I've seen from him himself, it seems like he got COVID with no symptoms and went into hiding, and has recently resurfaced, and won't even take his mask off, despite the fact that he's been photographed and photographed and video recorded several times without masks. Dirt Clay says America is watching as an experiment. And Pastmaster Dan says, since the SCOTUS knocked down the mandate, employment has skyrocketed. No more testing or masks. Yeah, that is at the federal level. At the state level, it's on a case-by-case basis. In California, for example, I can't remember if they made it a state law or not. They just issued, government fiat. So in California, they basically said that any sort of healthcare setting, including dental offices and other somewhat medical related stuff, any sort of business in those areas, that the masks and the vaccines and all those mandates are still in place. So we're going to have to find out, I guess, in California and other um, states with governments that are essentially locked up by the far left. We'll see if that happens at a state level to follow with the federal ruling or not. Chuck Reardon says he has a laundry list of ethics complaints that he was protected against due to his popularity. He's losing the safety net as we watch. Yeah, so that's another thing that I was thinking about when it comes to storytelling in the media, is the credibility of the storyteller. You know, there's so many of us who will watch a film, or will read a comic or a novel or watch a TV show for the first time based on who's involved. Who are the storytellers? For comics, who's drawing the book? Who's writing the book? Who's coloring the book? Films, you know, who's directing? Who's acting? Who's writing? And so we do that because those storytellers have essentially earned our trust to a certain extent, in that we've liked what they did before. We think there's a good chance that we'll like what they're doing again, so we'll give it a shot. When it comes to the mass media, I find it very interesting that in the last several years, the mainstream cable news networks, the main broadcast networks that people don't have to pay for, they've just lost. I guess it depends on, I don't want to get into exact statistics because those vary by channel or network and what have you, but anywhere from 50% to 70% in the last few years has been very common. Some of them up to 80 to 90%. And we've seen the explosion of viewership on independent or with independent media outlets, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's Rumble or Odyssey or BitChute, whether it's done through Twitter. I mean, Scott Adams, I don't know if he's still doing it, but I know at one point he was doing videos on Twitter where he would have more people tuning in than some cable news networks for their shows. Have a good one, Past Master Dan. Hope it goes well for you. Dirk was saying that with his earlier comment of America's watching as an experiment, he says, I mean to see if people will stand up. If Canada stands up, then they don't stand a chance here. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I just saw today how in France, there were truckers trying to do the same thing with a convoy, you know, to protest what their government has been doing to them as part of this COVID response effort. And I didn't get to dig into the article, but apparently the French government is trying to break that up before it can really get going. Surprise, surprise. It might be they're afraid that it could be effective. It certainly seems to have lit a fire in Canada. And as Dirk says, you know, other nations are watching. Past Master Dan says, no one finds it suspicious that all these governments have no problem instituting the kind of fascism needed to control masses. Did we not get the memo? Yeah, that it goes back to, in my opinion, at least in part, it goes back to storytelling. You know, people for generations in America have relied on mass media to give them, quote unquote, the news. And people trusted that it would be done so objectively and truthfully. And I think that as technology advanced and news became more and more a part of people's lives, and they were exposed to it on a more frequent basis, to the point where it's not just every day, but now 24 hours a day when we got into cable news networks. And then with the advent of the internet and it getting popular, it's not only 24 hours a day, but you can take it with you First it was on your laptop, and then it was your cell phone. Who knows what's next? A chip implanted under your skin. So I think it was just a gradual takeover, if you will, of the attention of people, while selectively feeding them certain information and trying to hide other information. And I think that's how a populace over time, can be taken over, if you will, to your earlier comment, without noticing. Except it seems like we've gotten to a point where a lot of people in a lot of countries have noticed. It seems like the COVID response was the thing that really woke up a lot of people who either had been asleep or were kind of on the fence as to how they felt about their government. American Comics Company says SCOTUS is now referral case law to base a defense all the way back up to the Supreme Court. It'll be interesting to see where the states shake out on this. I know that due to it looks like to me that starting with, in America at any rate, starting with the 2020 presidential election and how that ended, the COVID response had a lot of people unsettled, and then it seemed like the election made that worse, and then the actions taken by the Biden administration, some people like them, some people don't. A whole lot of people seem to be really unhappy based on the opinion polls that talk about Biden's job performance. So it seems like there's been this process of, if we're talking about waking up, whether it's to one particular viewpoint or another, I don't know if it's that as much as just people waking up to the fact that they are the ones who send elected representatives into office, and we get what we vote for in many cases. Sometimes we get what we don't vote for. There's a lot of people who are very angry because they feel like they did not get who they voted for. I mean, you can go back to Bernie Sanders in the 2015 election, before Hillary became the nominee for the Democrats. And there were multiple voting districts where it was discovered, and this is not, my opinion, this is not me making up a story. I mean, this is all on public record. It's all been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there was voting fraud with the DNC actually working in collusion with the Hillary campaign to prevent Bernie voters from having their votes counted. And unfortunately, those voters tried to go through the process, and they got shafted. It's not the only example of it. But yeah, I mean, I think I think we're at a point now in many Western countries where enough people have been woken up to the reality that if they're not involved in the choosing of representatives in government, then they can find themselves in a situation where a whole bunch of people they did not vote for are determining what they can or can't do, what they can or can't say. And I think a whole lot of people have decided they really don't like that very much. That used to be just something you would see in movies, but when you're living it and you've never lived it before, it's quite a rude awakening. Chuck says, they fear the truckers because they keep the country supplied with most of its needs. Nothing like a lack of basics will get a population to rise up. Yeah, I remember what it was like around here when people couldn't find toilet paper because there was a run on toilet paper and paper towels and a few other things at the grocery stores, at the big box retail stores. And man, there were people fighting in grocery store aisles over, a roll of toilet paper. American Comics Company says the only failure you will endure in the Constitution is if you are quote unquote willful or quote unquote proved willful. Yeah, people, I think by the droves are learning that they have to be willfully involved in, how the country is run. Otherwise, they will get run by it, whether they like it or not. Marigo Ann says, two minds. On the one hand, happy to get vaccinated and wear a mask if need be, asthmatic. On the other, it's tiring to see Fauci worship blindly and dishonesty being pushed like riots, protests. Yeah, and that when you have people who you trust, whether it's a filmmaker or a comic writer or a government official at the National Institute of Health, who is the spokesperson for the COVID response by the federal government, you want to be able to trust these people. But when they show themselves to be untrustworthy, then it's no surprise when people revolt. Whether that's simply no longer buying a comic, no longer watching a TV show, or no longer trusting that government official. I mean, Fauci, has on it's public. It's a matter of public record now. Again, this is not an opinion statement. He has been proved categorically, beyond a shadow of a doubt, to have lied to the American people repeatedly, and he's been questioned about it in front of Congress. And when he was questioned about it, he first denied it, and then he said that, well, we didn't want to start a panic, so we felt it was necessary to say blah 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 blah. Okay, well, if for a moment we give you the benefit of the doubt, although by now you've been caught lying so many times, I don't know why we would, but hypothetically, let's say if we gave you the benefit of the doubt, I would then say, okay, well, what happens when your lie is discovered? Then you lose whatever credibility you might have had with the American public. It's been, was it last week, I think? The latest opinion polls were done on the trust of the public in the federal government, particularly as pertains to public health. And it's either at an all-time low or at an all-time low since the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. I can't remember which one, but anyway, it's extremely low. So now the question is, how do you restore, or how do you earn back any credibility you once had, so that when the next public health crisis, real or otherwise, happens, how do you expect to convince people that you're telling the truth? Just like the storytellers of Marvel and DC and any other comic book publisher or independent comic creators, like Brian Pulido, for example, as far as indies go, all of us as readers have certain amount of trust. If we've read their work and we like it, a certain amount of trust that they'll repeat it. And if they don't, then they lose our trust and they lose our purchasing power. Someone like Brian Pulido earned the trust of his readers, and it seems like every year he has their trust renewed because of the way he treats them. Jasper says, R or D, Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter. This country operated by a single career politician will perpetuate this authoritarian power structure that's firmly in place. They won't walk it back. I think what we're seeing is a real shift in political influence, I guess you would say. I said at the beginning of the show, I'm not going to be pushing any particular political position, not pushing any candidates or anything like that. When I do sort of a general assessment of politics in the U.S., it seems to me, based on all of the survey data, that a lot of people on the left have shifted more to the center, and it seems like a lot of people on the right have done the same thing. And you combine that with some real structural problems in the Democrat and Republican organizational hierarchies, and there seems to be a lot of shifting and moving as far as who's in charge. And so I think we're probably in the US, I can't speak for other countries, but I think in the US we're going to see some changes in organizational hierarchies. I don't know if that will lead to the formation of a third party. I sort of doubt it, but I think that we're seeing, more or less reinventions of the existing parties. I guess time will tell. Let's see. I saw Mo Biggs in here. Mo says, I don't trust these free crack pipes, Joe. I'll just use my own. Thanks. Attaboy, Mo. Fight the power. Don't give in to the man. Chuck says, well, Mo, we know you only use the Cadillac of crack pipes. Only the best for the best. So when it comes to some of these social movements, I guess you would say, the mass media telling us stories about this or that. When I was thinking about this trucker convoy and these people who, from everything that I've seen, which has been that it's a whole lot of peaceful protesting and a whole lot of civil disobedience without the violence of the BLM and Antifa protests / riots. I see people who are trying to appeal to a sense of reason, as well as a sense of emotion. I see people who are trying to, reclaim the freedoms that they feel have been taken away from them. It was reminding me of Brexit and how that all went down, and how in the years since the vote passed, the different stories that have been told about that. And it seems to be a very similar thing where you've got this vote that happened with the UK separating from the European Union. And if you didn't know anything about it and you were just simply to listen to the stories of the people who were for or against it, you might have a difficult time figuring out exactly what was going on there. But, at the end of the day, it seems like more people in the UK wanted to leave the European Union than wanted to stay. And the politics of the day were very reflective of that. And the vote to separate from the European Union passed. And in the years since, there's been a whole lot of angst and unrest over the fact that apparently the UK government has not implemented all of the things that they were supposed to implement as a result of the vote passing. So as I look at, the stories that were told of how Brexit happened and why, and the stories now of this trucker convoy in Canada, and how a lot of it seems to be tied to authoritarians trying to exercise power that they think they have over people. Maybe in some cases, they are legally able to exercise that power. I know in California, new laws have been passed in the last few years to allow what used to be considered unthinkable to now be a matter of law. Requiring employees, for example, to inject themselves or be injected with an experimental vaccine. And in the case of COVID, it is by definition experimental, as the FDI defines these things. um, you know, having employees be required to be injected with an experimental substance just to retain their job. Uh, you know, that would be that was unthinkable in the not too distant past, and yet here we are. Let's see. Telepathic Bunny says, what we are seeing is the churning of culture. Those who were pushed out have become counterculture. The punk rock of today becomes a classic rock of tomorrow. The Cro-Magnon hated Homo sapiens. Yeah, how interesting that former counterculture types like Neil Young, who in the 60s were all about, speaking truth to power, man. And now they're all about sucking up to power and trying to censor people who want to speak freely. And then, like you said, many of us who were, part of culture find ourselves as considered counterculture. And many of us don't think that we've changed, but things around us have. Alda Schneidley says it took them 5 years to get the ball rolling for Brexit. Yeah, it takes a lot of time to change a culture. It takes a lot of time to build one up, a lot of time to break one down, a lot of time to change one from what it used to be into what it will become. So I know that many of us have been, if not all of us, have been conditioned to have much shorter attention spans than we used to, with the constant bombardment of data. But if we think back to how long it took, let's say, for women to get the right to vote, or how long it took to get a Civil Rights Act passed in the U.S. Other countries go through similar changes. How long did it take to get the situation between England, or I should say the UK and Ireland, worked out? When you had bombing in the streets in previous decades. Stuff definitely takes a long time. What we're seeing now with COVID response over the last couple of years, and Brexit and the trucker convoy and whatever's going to happen this year, it's definitely not going to be over quickly, in my opinion. Telepathic Bunny says Rage Against the Machine is requiring proof of vax. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Welcome, Aerith. Good to see you, Brian. Mr. Von Stugel says every hippie he's met has been a duplicitous turd. Well, that's unfortunate. All right, Aerith. Have a good one. Show UPS and USPS what it's all about. Thanks for stopping by. Jasper says getting laid off for pandemic was a gift. He's self-employed now. Right on, man. I'm glad to hear that. I know that there's always opportunity in times like what we're living in now, where things are being disrupted. In some cases, jobs are ended, or entire industries can be ended. And as catastrophic as that is for some, it's always an opportunity for others. And so I think one of the things that's helping people to get through all of this stuff is trying to look for opportunities where they can be successful in whatever it is they're doing. So I'm really happy to hear that, Jasper. That's great. KSSS says, I suspect a great many of the former quote-unquote counterculture, truth to power types were always just posers. No, that couldn't be. The Telepathic Bunny says, someone who has never been in the mainstream, never sniffed the writing rooms, Vonster, a CG creation went over 10K in less than 2 hours yesterday. That is my target. Yeah. Last night on the Michael Bancroft show, we had Vaughn Klaus as a guest, and we were looking at Terror in the Trenches, his new project. And it's definitely, another example of somebody, making the most of opportunity, trying to do things his own way, and trying to be a storyteller who respects his audience and tries to give them what they want in a way that he doesn't, go against his conscience, and he's being successful. Zaid Comics is here. What's up, Phil? Good to see you. Marigo Ann says Brexit is being handled horribly. The yes or no options were a poor execution. Yeah, I mean, as somebody who has kind of been watching that with interest, seeing, how a lot of things have been turning out in the U.S., and someone who's always had an interest in Britain and the people there, I really hope that in the next couple of years that Brits can get some representatives in there to carry out the responsibilities that they have as a result of that vote. You'll never please everybody, but if you're not going to even make a show, much less do the work of reaching out to your audience and finding out what it is that they need from you or they want from you, then you're not going to be in a position to reach them at all, because they're going to boot you out, or they're going to turn their backs or withhold their dollar or whatever it is. Amanda B says, heading to a concert next weekend and the venue wants proof of vax or a negative test. Yeah, I wonder how many public venues, whether it's, a concert hall or a casino or in some, parks department that has an open air amphitheater at one of the parks, how many of these places hosting entertainment have been threatened with liability lawsuits by government if they don't put these requirements in place. I know last week I was chaperoning a school field trip for one of my kids, and we didn't find out until I think the day before that every chaperone had to either have proof of vax or a negative COVID test. And so I lost hours out of my day, which, believe me, I know we're all very busy, and I'm no exception. So taking hours out of my day to get a test and go through it and just to show that it's negative, certainly wasn't happy about that. And I guess there's a lot of people now who unfortunately are having to do that every week for their job. American Comics Company says there's a disconnect in the music culture where actual musicians produce music and those that use a computer to quote unquote do the work. Personally, I like my music how I like my comics, physical and in hand. Yeah, I don't blame you. I'm the same way. And I think that we're also seeing that reflected in the vast migration of people away from television news to independent sources online, because we crave authenticity. And so many people, myself included, find people who seem to genuinely want to report the news honestly and with as little personal bias as possible, or report the news honestly and also report their biases honestly, so that you know what you're getting up front. As long as somebody is operating within a state of full disclosure, I'm okay with, watching this person who's biased to the left, or that person who's biased to the right, or this person who's biased, 100 miles down the libertarian camp. Just, let me know up front what the biases are. and then I'll make my own decisions. Thank you very much. So I think that, to your comment about music, I think there's a real push, like the resurgence of vinyl records, for example, by independent musicians, independent performers who are pressing wax, and maybe I'm sure they are still doing compressed digital files and getting their music out that way, but they're also pressing CDs, or they're also pressing vinyl records. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that most of us still crave authenticity. And so if we're big music fans, then we're still wanting to get that authentic experience through music, despite the proliferation of auto-tune and iTunes and whatever other tunes are out there being used to produce music. Let's see. Woodrow says, Rage has always been idiots, though. Honestly, they get a bunch of people at shows to chant in unison, F you, I won't do what you tell me. Insert Palpatine. Ironic, isn't it? Jasper said, I wanted to see Cheap Trick in Vegas. They require vax status and government ID recorded in an effing phone app. Yep. I think whoever is pushing against power grabs, I think, at least I hope, that they're understanding that it has to be a continual process. It can't be a, one vote and we're done type of a thing. Because as many of us who crave freedom in every sense of the word, there are those who don't, and then there are those who crave control wherever they can get it. And so those of us who crave freedom have to continually push against those who crave control. There was a comment earlier. Amanda B responding to Anne. Okay, so Anne said, so talking about the concert venue requiring vax or a negative test, and Amerigo Anne says, I can understand that it's to help curb the spread. And Amanda says, I can too, not complaining. Most places in Maine have their own requirements. I'm just glad that they're giving the option to go if they so choose. Yeah. As someone who is all about freedom of choice, I certainly support the choice of and the freedom of business owners to choose what sort of requirements do they want to put in place in order for customers to do business with them, and then obviously the customers will decide if it's worth it or not. Oh, and this concert was rescheduled from 2 years ago, pre-COVID. Such a long way. Yeah. Jasper says, proof of vax doesn't bother me. Recording this info in a phone app is unacceptable. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the Chinese social credit system. And a lot of people are saying, and have been saying, that it seems like, the U.S. and other Western countries, the way they copied China's response to the COVID situation. I think it's a valid question to ask, why is it that when in the U.S. at least, can't speak for other countries, but in the U.S. we've had certain protocols for responding to pandemics for over 100 years, and those were refined and improved over time to the point where a lot of people would say we got really good at responding to pandemics in a rational way that tried to protect the sick and also protect the integrity, the structural integrity of the country, and keep life moving, keep the country rolling. And it's, I I think, very curious as to why the US and other Western countries would choose to follow a totalitarian communist regime's response to a pandemic rather than sticking with the way that we've responded to them in the past. And then when you consider this whole Chinese social credit system, and you consider how we're being told this story, again, going back to storytelling, in America, we're being told that, all we need to do is submit to all of these mandates, submit to all of these impositions upon our liberty. And then, just to have a record of all of our, how can I say this on YouTube? Basically agree to have the government track all of these decisions that we make, and that they can track us not only by location, but also by lifestyle, and also by what we say, and also by what we don't say, and also by and so on and so forth. Seems like the current U.S. government and other current governments in other Western countries, seems like they're trying to be more and more like the authoritarian Chinese Communist government. Woodrow says, I just told my job I got vaxxed. They didn't ask for proof. Thank God. Hey, Rick. Glad you could join us. Good to see you. Let's see. KSSS, going back to the music topic. Neil Young doesn't own the rights to his music. Blackstone does. Truth to power, Mr. Young. Yeah, exactly. There was another one up here. Telepathic Bunny says, Neil is considered, quote unquote, the father of grunge. Most were addicts and self-destructive. You can't listen to their music without Soul Loft. I liked grunge back in the day. Haven't listened to it in a long time. Rick Saylor says, I'll spend $0 where a mask or jab is required, and that's permanently. Chuck Reardon says, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is a problem when you have a political class of people. Well, I think that America has always been at its best when there was no supermajority of a political party. Just going back the last 20 years, I guess almost 22 years, but when in the George W. Bush years, when Republicans had a supermajority, I think they did some stuff that really brought some harm to the country. When the Democrats had a supermajority during the Obama years, same thing. They did it from the other side of the aisle, but I think they did some things that really brought some harm to the country. Either way, whether left or right, supermajorities are no good, because clearly in this country we have a wide diversity of opinions of what people want from their government, and so if you don't have, this is a representative government that we're supposed to be operating here. So the representatives are supposed to represent their constituents, not their own self-interest. Anytime you get a supermajority in place, whether it's from the left or the right, you can forget about them trying to represent their constituents accurately. So here's something from Telepathic Bunny. He says, the best thing that ever happened for this country is the political left got everything they ever wanted. So now people who didn't know what they are about are getting an eyeful. Isn't that true with political parties? I mean, they can publish their platform, let the public check it out, but really it's their actions which are going to tell us what they're going to do, what we can expect them to continue doing. So, those who voted for the current administration, I guess some of them got what they wanted, some of them got what they didn't want, and some of them are going to be voting the same, and some of them are going to be voting different. Mo Biggs says, I have it on good authority that neither of the pre-grunge musical acts that existed, Stryper and the Osmonds, used drugs. I am very happy to hear that, Mo. I would be devastated if I found out that Donnie and Murray were junkies. Comic Talk with Pops Van Sant at the very end of the show says, how you doing, Joe? I'm doing all right, Pops. How you doing? Dealing with a lot of stuff, but doing all right. We've been trying to move 20 years of accumulated stuff around this house to get our kids in their own rooms. And man, when you've got both parents with health problems, there's a lot of stuff that you just kind of, shove in the attic or the garage or the back of the room or whatever, because you're not able to deal with it right at that moment. And 20 years of that stuff sure piles up. But we've made a lot of good progress. Lady Fulton and I have been sharing an office for several weeks now. We've got that system figured out. We got one of the kids about halfway moved into a bedroom, and progress continues. Had a medicine cabinet trying to fall off of a bathroom wall that I've been trying to deal with that the last couple of days, but life goes on, and I hope you're doing well, Pops. So that's our show, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys make it a great day today. I'm certainly going to try to do that. I hope that as we're all looking at what's coming down the road in 2022 with the stories we're being told by media, that we'll remember that storytelling is really about trying to convince the viewer or the reader or the listener of something. Whether it's escapist entertainment and you're trying to convince the person that for that moment what's happening in that story is real, to give them an escape from the rest of what's happening in their lives, or it's the media and they're trying to convince you of one thing or another because of the reasons that they have, which I won't get into because this is YouTube. So anyway, hope you guys make it a great day. And we'll see you next week. Bye.